if you're reading this, you have likely joined the group Mentoring Aspiring Graduate Students and Building an Inclusive Community. This is a program put on by a group of us at the University of Connecticut. It's also known as the MAGIC program, and this presentation is to aid any mentees in their meetings that they have with the different mentors they match up with, just to give everyone some background advice specific to applying to graduate school. So first things first, just to discuss what graduate school is, a bit of a disclaimer, this is from a psychology perspective, so this may change depending on what programs you're looking at, but for the most part it sounds like a lot of STEM fields are very similar. So some programs that you look at for graduate school are what we call, these are master's programs when you're looking to get your master's degree. And these programs are typically about 2 years of coursework. They may also involve some research, and oftentimes students will actually need to pay tuition to attend these, although you can find some programs where the tuition is waived. In PhD programs, in most of these fields, that is about a 5 to 7 year program. Sometimes you get your master's along the way, sometimes it's not included. It depends on the field and the program. In these programs, your tuition is usually paid for, and you get a stipend, which is another word for essentially a salary for teaching or research. So you may be a TA or a teaching assistant for a class, or you may be a research assistant, and that may be how you are getting paid to live, for your rent, for food, things like that. The timeline for a PhD program, it does vary from different programs, but a timeline for it looks roughly like this. You would spend the first couple years taking most of your classes, preparing and running your master's thesis if you get your master's along the way in that program. And then in your third year, that's typically when you get your master's degree and you prepare for what we call qualifying exams, which they take a different form in lots of different programs. So it's always good to talk to people in your specific field about what those look like. And then in years 4 to 5, you would pass your exams, you would propose, conduct, write, and defend your dissertation, which is an experiment that you do. And then you would receive your PhD. And so a lot of this is going to be focused on research because a lot of grad school in STEM fields is very research-based. And so something that you may want to think about if you haven't already is getting involved in research. This is because whether or not you plan to go to grad school, getting involved in research is a great way to get hands-on learning and experience. It connects you with different faculty and graduate students that can help you figure out what you want to do and further your career. It helps you apply what you've learned in the classroom so that you really get concrete experience with the different concepts you may have learned in class. It looks great on your CV or your resume, and if you are unfamiliar with a CV, we'll discuss that in a few slides. And in general, just doing research is really fun and interesting. It's a great way to learn. But I do want to note that a lot of times doing research isn't a paid position. That's typically based on volunteering, but a lot of times the faculty that you're working with do understand that you may need to balance a job and research work, so they will typically work with you on how many hours you need to spend working on research in the lab. To get involved in research, you can look for what we call RA or research assistant application forms, and different professors will have them on their website, so you can find them there. But even if you can't find one, most of them you can just email and ask. And in this email, you're going to want to tell them a sentence or two about yourself, how their work interests you, and that you would like to discuss working with them if they have any openings. And just as a quick note, know that it is never really too late to do this. Graduated seniors can sometimes work in the lab as well. You just may want to let them know, hey, I'm graduating or I just graduated and I would like to volunteer in your lab. It's totally fine. It is never too late to start doing this. Moving on to the different application materials you will be putting together when you get ready to apply to graduate school. The first thing is the CV, which is what we mentioned last slide. A CV is basically an academic resume. It's a record of your relevant research, relevant work, or different academic experiences for what you're applying for, which in this case is likely to be grad school, so you're going to want your different research experiences different skills that you've picked up in those, different things like that. That is something that almost all of our mentors are able to talk to you about. You're also going to need a statement of purpose or a personal statement. It varies with different programs, what it's called, but most of them are essentially the same thing. It is a 1 to 2 page essay about why you want to be a graduate student in that program, and it usually inside of it you're going to describe any relevant experiences you've had and how they have prepared you for graduate study. You're also going to need at least 3 letters of recommendation. So these are letters that you ask different people to write about how well prepared you are for what you're applying to. These are often best if they come from faculty, usually faculty that hold a PhD if you're applying to a PhD program. And it's especially helpful if these faculty are in the field you're applying to or in a related field. Ideally, these are going to be faculty that you've worked with or spoken to a lot in or outside of class. You want these to come from people who know you and and are able to speak to the work that you do. You're also going to need a transcript. A lot of times I find that unofficial transcripts are accepted in the application, with official transcripts needing to be sent upon acceptance, but this does vary, so you should check for each program that you apply to. And then there's the GRE, which is becoming less and less required, at least in psychology. This may vary for different fields. But in order to check on this, again, you can check the program's website. There's usually information about what each program requires somewhere on their graduate program website. So those are all the things that you need. But what about choosing a graduate program? Typically, I would advocate for choosing advisor over the institution. It's one thing to be like, okay, I know that I really want to go to grad school at Yale. That's fine, but what's more important than the label on the degree that you get is the person that you study with, because they ultimately shape who you become as a scholar, and it's their research that you tend to do or do something related to it. So it's really more important that you find an advisor who fits your research needs and the type of style that you prefer in a supervisor. So that's my 2 cents, but definitely check if you are already working with someone, check with your current advisor, any grad students in the lab. It's also helpful as you're thinking about choosing these graduate programs or these advisors in the different programs to ask grad students in your field, what would you look for when you're applying to grad school? What helps you have a better experience? And it can be really enlightening and help you figure out things that you might want to keep in mind when you're choosing people. And again, just keep in mind that an institution can look impressive, but what is more important are the opportunities and the research you were able to achieve, and your advisor is typically the key here. So if you are going the route of choosing an advisor over a program, these are some tips on being able to choose an advisor. So one thing that's probably at the top of everyone's minds is the research. You want to know what kind of work they do in their lab, because you're typically going to be doing work that's very related to their work. So what you can do is a lot of these faculty will have websites where they have a list of some of their papers. So you want to read the abstracts or maybe the intro and discussion of a few papers. You do not need to read these papers in full. That would take you way too long. But definitely just read the abstracts. And if you still feel like you don't fully understand, it can be helpful to dip into the intro or the discussion section of some of the papers and just figure out, does their work sound interesting to you? Are the questions they're asking questions that you would also like to ask? Another thing that you want to look at is mentoring style. This might not be something that you can figure out at the get-go when you're making your list, but something that may hint at their mentoring style that you can find even before you contact them is often they'll have a lab website and you can see how many grad students they already have, which can let you know how much attention those grad students may be getting. Someone who has upwards of 4 or 5 grad students may not be able to give all those grad students a lot of their uninterrupted time. But then that also leads to whether or not you prefer hands-on or hands-off advising. So maybe you don't really mind too much if you won't get a lot of their uninterrupted time. And so it doesn't matter to you as much how many grad students they have. You will be able to find more out about their mentoring style once you contact them and if you are invited for an interview, but it can be helpful to just look at this ahead of time as well. Other factors that people look at, sometimes they look at publishing history. Are they currently publishing a lot of papers, or does it seem like there's a pause in it? This can be sometimes difficult because they may not always update their websites super frequently. And depending on your field, lots of publications may not be super important, but in some fields it is. So it's good to look into that. You may also want to look at whether or not the faculty is pre or post tenure. So what that is it's something that a lot of faculty get after a certain point in research institutions. So you can figure that out by the title they have. Assistant professor is often pre-tenure. They do not yet have tenure, versus associate professor means that they do. This is a distinction that I make because oftentimes people who are pre-tenure, these assistant professors, may be more interested and more motivated to churn out more publications than faculty who are post-tenure. That's not always the case, but it is something that I know I have colleagues that have looked at that. You may also want to see who they're collaborating with. Do they tend to have names of people from different labs on their papers? They may be particularly good at getting you connected if that's the case. If you want to see if they have any grants, the location that of their university that they work at is in, if that matters to you, etc. There's a lot of other things you can look at. The last thing is personality. This is last but not least. This matters at different levels to people depending on their working style, but generally you want to figure out if you can get along well with this person because you may be working with them for the next 5 to 7 years, and it's also good to be clear about what their expectations are of you as a student. But I do note that you may have to wait until interviews to find out, but it's good to keep this in mind when you're choosing an advisor. So moving more generally about the search for advisors and programs, it is often helpful to ask different professors and grad students that you currently work with, even if you don't think that their chosen topic is related to their work. They may know other people in the field that you can talk to that can help. Outside of that, if you or someone else that you know went to a conference recently, you can ask them for the conference program or the book of abstracts. A lot of times these things are even posted online that you can get for free, so you can check for those as well. And these are helpful to have because they let you see the most recent research being done and which labs are doing it. Depending on your field, I think for the most part, you can find out whose lab it is by the last name on the poster, but some fields it's the first name. So you can just Google the first author or the last author on an abstract and see if they have a lab website that comes up. Another way that you can go about this is if you've read an interesting paper for class or anything else, again, you can look into the authors or maybe who the authors are referencing to find other people that you may want to work with. And lastly, I would just say that I find that the list of priorities for picking a school should go in these levels. So I think the most important thing is the advisor. The second most important thing is any potential backup advisors, followed by the program community and the resources, and the last thing is the institution itself. And the last thing I want to say before you jump into meeting with your mentors and signing up for those meetings is that when you are preparing to meet with any mentors you match up with, it's going to be helpful if you can prepare like a short introduction, about 1 to 2 minutes, just of what year you're in, if you're in undergrad or where you're at, what research or relevant work that you've done, and what you're interested in. If you have graduate application questions, it's helpful to see if the answers are in these slides or this video, or you can actually use this video to refer to if you want to ask if they have a different opinion. If you have questions about what you want to pursue, it may be helpful to try to think of what has interested you in the past, and that way you can bring that up with the mentors you match with and see if they can help you figure out a good field that you may want to pursue. And just also do not be afraid to ask any questions that you might think are dumb. Often these questions are not dumb at all. And just know that we are all in the business of learning. We're happy to help. That's what we like to do. So please ask any question that you have. If you don't ask a question, you'll never find the answer. So please always ask. And the last thing is, if you aren't sure that you understand what your mentor is saying, try to repeat what you think they mean back to them to get clarification. Oftentimes this can help because when you're having these meetings, if you feel a little bit nervous and maybe you're not getting the information as you feel like you should, sometimes it's helpful to be like, oh, so I think that you're saying this. And then they can verify whether or not that's the case. And that can help you get a clearer message than you may have otherwise. So with that, thank you so much and happy matching.